Good afternoon to everyone. My name is Lynne Speed, and I will be doing the main presentation today. Diane, who had some other tasks back at the office, is not going to be able to be with us. So what I'm going to basically do is do this in two sections. The first is on the very, very urgent needed economic reforms that Mr. LaRouche spelled out in a discussion with our national organization on Sunday. And he was very emphatic. The entire global financial system is not just going, it's gone. Wall Street, the City of London, the transatlantic system is hopelessly, irreparably bankrupt. They are finished. You've got something in the order of magnitude of 1.7 quadrillion dollars in debt. That's, something with 15 zeros after it, but it's even hard to think about these figures the way one of my friends described it. It's like having a ping pong ball trying to lift Saturn. The planet of Saturn. It can't work. It just can't function. And everything is blowing out. That is emphatically what is driving both Wall Street and the City of London with a series of provocations against particularly Russia, secondarily China, around the Ukraine and around a related situation. So what we have to do is to guarantee that you either don't have a catastrophic, simple collapse in which you have vast misery and, in fact, genocidal death for billions of people on the planet, or that you don't have World War III, which would be a much quicker and probably much more thorough death for the planet. And so therefore what we have to do is replace this dying system immediately with a series of very, very concrete measures, which is a bridge to getting the entire economy functioning again. And in a few minutes, we'll actually read through and discuss a little bit, if people have questions, those specific measures, which you all have a paper in your hands with that, and we'll see if there's any questions on that. The second thing, second part of what I want to go through is the alternative in a global scale that the LaRouche movement for 40 years, and then specifically the Schiller Institute for the last 30 years, has been fighting to build up. A new paradigm, a new global economic order based on the idea of the most advanced scientific and technological progress, centered around a very, very different conception of man, which is not the oligarchical conception of man as a beast, but actually the true nature of mankind with a creative potential to create new scientific discoveries, which are then implemented, which allows you to lift up the entire population of the planet. And we have had conference after conference after conference. In fact, Helga LaRouche recently said in a discussion, we must have had thousands of conferences. They're really uncountable, which has organized a residue, a faction around these ideas of scientific and technological progress, which now exist in every single country. These are also the founding principles of this nation, and very, very specifically the ideas of Alexander Hamilton, which was put into practice, particularly organized out of New York City, with a series of writings, particularly after the success of the American Revolution. It was recognized by Hamilton that the that the nation would not be able to exist. It would not persist. It would be undermined unless you had a corresponding economic policy based on the principles enshrined in the Declaration of Independence. And it was for that purpose that in the aftermath of the Constitutional Convention and the fight for the Constitutional Convention to actually put together one unified federal nation as opposed to a series of little confederacies competing with one another, which could have easily been picked off, and there were operations at that point by the British and by the European oligarchy, the Dutch and others, to undermine that. You put together a unified nation. So Hamilton, together with John Jay and help me here for a minute, I'm just losing. And James Madison were actually organizing, wrote the Federalist Papers to get a debate and discussion centered here in New York. We are now picking that up directly, and this is why LaRouche has talked so much about the idea of the Manhattan Project and what we're doing here in New York City in particular. So we've got a 2-week horizon from today on the 14th of February, which is President's Day weekend. I know a lot of people also like to remind us it's Valentine's Day also, but importantly, it's 2 days after Lincoln's actual birthday, 2 days before the Washington and Lincoln's birthday is celebrated on President's Day. February 14th, we will be hosting a major conference here in New York City, and the conference will be on the theme of creating a mass movement for economic development. Let us join the BRICS to rebuild the world economy. And we're not only inviting all of you and the listening audience to come to that, but we're inviting you, or we're urging you to take this period between now and then and organize to create a breakthrough in the United States in the direction of what LaRouche has been calling for in terms of these emergency economic reforms, which is our pathway to join the BRICS. That is the antidote to the war danger. You put the alternative there, you organize and you replace this dying, bankrupt system with an actual alternative policy. And that's what we want people really to bring to the conference on the 14th. Think about, and we'll discuss more of this during the implementation sector of the conference, but as you go through today, the purpose of today is to give you the tools to be able to organize other people. And people can do all kinds of things as part of the organizing. You can visit all of the ethnic restaurants in your area, which is what one of our activists did a few weeks ago, went to the Brazil and the Chinese and the Russian restaurants and organized the restaurant owners or shopkeepers there around, why don't you become an advocate for the BRICS? You have a connection to these nations. People can get on the talk radio shows. People can send out emails to their friends, or if you use Twitter or Facebook or Instagram. These are all various things that we can use to actually spread and create a breakthrough. And then you want to come into that conference actually having done something which shapes the conference and shapes the period immediately following that. So, let's go first. Let's start by going through this report that we issued. It was the lead of the website, and what I'd ask people to do is to take out this piece, which is entitled "Take the U.S. Economy from Bankrupt Wall Street, Create Federal Credit for Growth and Employment." And this is on the other side of the leaflet is the announcement for the rally, which we will be holding at Federal Hall on Tuesday. It's Wall Street or You. This will be the second in what we intend to be a series of regular rallies right on Wall Street. We did one very successfully 2 weeks ago from this coming Tuesday, where we had over 60 people out engaged in active discussions with all of the people coming through the entire area in front of Federal Hall. This is the big building where Washington was actually inaugurated and was the seat of the first government of the United States. And Hamilton's First National Bank is right down from there. So that rally will be on Tuesday. And the message we want to take out is what we will read now. So actually, can I get a volunteer to begin the reading on this? Andrews?
The Wall Street system of banks is again facing a bankruptcy crisis, this time triggered by collapsing oil and commodity debt and derivatives. And even central bankers know that it will be as bad as a second 2008 crash or worse. These banks have been generally bankrupt since the impact of the elimination of Glass-Steagall. Wall Street's bankruptcy crisis is made worse by the free fall of the euro, and the fact that all the biggest European banks, most definitely including the London banks, are loaded to the gills with toxic debt securities of more and more varieties and have never written any of it off since 2008. A financial crash worse than 2008 is looming over this whole bankrupt London Wall Street system of banks. The United States must act immediately, generate a buffer against this crash for its economy and citizens. The Wall Street banks should effectively be shut down, put through a bankruptcy reorganization so that they may continue some limited function as commercial banks. The ability to manage things in the U.S. economy must be terminated now, or the economy faces a terrible crisis.
Let me just ask you to stop there, Andrews. Is this picking this up, or? Okay. Okay, good. So you had the elimination of Glass-Steagall in 1999, and Glass-Steagall had functioned successfully from the time of its implementation under Roosevelt in 1933, when Roosevelt came in. And is everybody familiar with what Glass-Steagall is? I think most people are here are. No? Okay. Glass-Steagall was the measure that Roosevelt put in. Of course, you had the stock market crash in 1929, and a lot of people who had absolutely nothing to do with the stock market. I mean, they had never bought stock. They had never made investments in these risky enterprises. They lost their life savings because the banks went bankrupt. What the banks had done is that they had intermingled the funds. So they had used people's savings deposits that were sitting in the bank to make more and more risky speculative ventures and investments. And so when the bank collapsed, because these speculative ventures collapsed, well then that gobbled up everything else because they had used people's money. So Glass-Steagall simply puts up a firewall which says you cannot intermingle the two things. If you have, on one hand, you have savings, those are, that's in the bank. On the other hand, the bank can't use other people's money to gamble and speculate with. So that bill, that division, was in place from 1933 right up through 1999. And there was an extensive campaign which began actually in the 1970s. And in many ways you could say it began with Nixon decoupling the dollar from a gold standard or reserve currency. So you no longer had a pegging between the currencies. You didn't have any, so you had a floating exchange rate. And this allowed for massive speculation to begin. And then in 1999, under massive pressure, the Lewinsky business, which was a setup, that's a different story, and so on, Clinton was basically put into a position of going along with what had been a multi-millions of dollars campaign, and also because of that whole setup around Lewinsky to sign off on the repeal of Glass-Steagall. So that ended that separation. Now, one of the things to note, and we'll come back to this more later, is when Glass-Steagall was implemented in the United States, interestingly enough, it essentially became the law of the world. It was also implemented with respect to the banking systems of Western Europe. And all of this was reversed, was rolled back, beginning with a series of decisions from Wall Street and the City of London. 1971, you actually had some earlier developments in London and so on. And then with the advent of the Euro and the whole European Union, you had a successive rolling back, which allowed for absolutely a decoupling of any type of connection between your monetary flows and the actual physical, real economy, meaning your productive powers. What was your transport? What was your production? What were you producing by way of steel? What were you involved in with trade, with agricultural production, with infrastructure, roads, bridges, rail lines, etc.? There was a complete decoupling of these two systems with a corresponding accelerating collapse of the physical economy, where you had an accelerating increase of the actual fictitious speculative economy. So we've now reached a point, we've reached an end point with respect to all of this, and this is what this is talking about. So, so just to continue, launched the bankruptcy reorganization of these mega banks by reinstating the Glass-Steagall Act to separate the doomed speculative divisions from their insured, regulated commercial banks and let the former go. As a substitute, a buffer of credit must be created. Federal credit. Okay, so this is not going to some rich guy and saying, please give us a handout. This is federal credit, which the government has the authority to issue, to put people back into productive, well-paid work. That means, above all, work related to crucial new products of modern infrastructure. Provide a source of federal credit to be used by states and federal governments to provide skilled employment and economic development. The United States must incur a limited debt to do so, but devote it entirely to this purpose. This has been done before, and it must be done again. Create a Reconstruction Finance Corporation with the initial government capital and issue RFC bonds to the public and to commercial banks to support national and state projects. Third, you're going to create a national bank with an initial capital of new Treasury debt and provide the great majority of that bank's capital by the voluntary trade of the existing 3 to 30-year Treasury debt. If $500 billion of the U.S. debt is voluntarily invested in the national bank, the Treasury can issue $500 billion in Treasury notes to the bank to start providing credit for productivity and employment. So in this last case, you're taking what is essentially some major multiple of that. It's probably as much as, this would be 1/10, if that, of the current U.S. Treasury debt. And what you're doing is you are converting this, or voluntarily people would say, well, I'm going to take my Treasury note, my Treasury bill, and I'm going to voluntarily put it into the national bank. So you'd be converting a portion of the Treasury debt in that way, and that gives you the credit to actually, for the new bank, the national bank, could provide credit to whatever the industry or the rail project or the manufacturing project that you want to set up. You're going to aid the states in a specific series of projects, which he now describes. High-speed rail network, give credit support to state and municipal bond issues for new economic infrastructure, provide Western drought measures for large-scale water diversion to large networks of nuclear desalination power plants, restore and replace an ancient national network of locks and dams, water navigation and water management, flood and storm protection, and so on. Just an important footnote here for those who are not familiar with this, the entire western states of the U.S. have been in a situation of terrible, terrible drought, which is getting worse massively worse every few months. And there's extensive material on our website regarding this, but this is an extremely serious issue. And that, of course, is where you have a great deal of the food production of the United States. So you're talking about California, Texas, New Mexico, a whole series of states. If you know people there, you have relatives. I was in Texas during the spring. The conditions are beyond belief horrific. And there is no national attention to that. And anybody who thinks that, well, you can get your food by going to the supermarket, well, it's got to be produced someplace. So we're all in very, very serious problem if this is not addressed. We want to also restore the cutbacks in medical care, firefighting, sanitation, water purification, and build a new, restoring the nation's historic levels of investment in the NASA space projects. Most crucial for this new national bank and Reconstruction Finance Corporation is join the BRICS, accept Chinese President Xi Jinping's offer to Obama at the APEC summit last November. And this is when Xi Jinping, and again, people can read this extensively in this pamphlet, but in the inside of the pamphlet is the actual statement from Xi Jinping in October, in the November 12th press conference with President Obama, in which he said, quote, "We welcome the active participation of the United States and other relevant countries so that together we can promote and share prosperity and peace in the Asia Pacific. China is ready to work with the United States to make efforts in a number of priority areas and putting into effect such principles as non-confrontation, non-conflict, mutual respect, and a win-win cooperation." So that offer is on the table. This is not geopolitical. It's not them against us, us against them. This is an offer for joint cooperation for the uplifting of all of humanity. So to continue on the flyer, use the National Bank and the Reconstruction Finance Corporation to join with the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank and other new international development banks and funds for Silk Road and Maritime Silk Road infrastructure, which have been created since the BRICS Allied Nations Summit in Brazil last July. In the process, multiply the buffer of federal credit for new infrastructure investments and productivity investments in America. Create a new economic platform for America's economy, driven by development of fusion technology and thermonuclear fusion power. Relaunch America's presence in the solar system in competition and cooperation with China's lunar program, now the world's leading space program. Wall Street's blowing out again will hit the economy like a major war. And Wall Street's desperation is turning to escalating financial and other warfare actions against the enemies of China, as they identify them, China and Russia, which is leading toward an actual thermonuclear war. That's why the new institution and the new economic platform must be supplied immediately, and we need to put everything into making it happen. So that's the outline of the type of emergency stopgap measures that we are simply going to declare have to be done right away. And we're going to take this message out very, very boldly to Wall Street on Tuesday at lunchtime. And once again, I would urge that everyone join in that can for that rally. Later on that day, for anyone who's here who is, let's say, mid-30s and younger, we will also be having a young adult cadre school, which will take place in the afternoon, and there'll be people here to discuss that with a little bit later. So we can come back to this if there are more questions and so on at the end, but I want to turn for a moment in terms of the way in which the power of these ideas actually function. Because we often get into a discussion where people say, well, you know, how are we going to get masses of people out in the street organizing around for this, or protesting the bad things that are going on? And of course, we've seen mass protests after mass protests. You know, the anti-war movement is a good case in point. Mass movements don't change policy. You change policy with ideas and with intervening on the highest level in terms of what has to be done to change things from the top. And that's the method around which this organization has been organized for over 40 years. We are going for changing the entire global economic structure. And right now, we are closer, probably than any point in history, of actually being able to do that, to change things in keeping, in consonance with the principles of the American Revolution for the entire globe. And in the past 8 months, there have been enormous advances in that process which have been put into motion, particularly over the last 40 years, specifically by the ideas of Lynne LaRouche and his associates in this political movement, which are now taking, I don't want to even say taking root, because the taking root was many years ago. You're now seeing not just sprouts coming out of the ground, but you're seeing entire trees and forests popping up. And this is what broke through in a major way in terms of the ideas of this movement in July of this year, when the 5 BRICS nations, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, got together in Fortaleza, Brazil, and they launched a new international monetary system, or the beginnings of a monetary system, but a bank specifically for development, and began to initiate a series of credit and related projects for economic development. This past week, we had another major advance in that entire process of moving in a different direction for humanity, and this was the results of the Greek elections held this past Sunday. The Syriza party won a near landslide victory. They have now formed a new government together with the Independent Party of Greece. And this is a stunning, powerful repudiation of the austerity policies which had been imposed on Greece by the Troika, right? The Troika being the European Union, the European Central Bank, or the European Commission, the European Central Bank, and the International Monetary Fund. And Troika was actually, it was referred to, in fact, the Greek leaders had referred to that as these people that flew in and out to order the Greeks what they could do, what they couldn't do, and what they had to cut. LaRouche, in hearing about the Greek vote, called it, quote, a profound victory that can secure a shift in the entire European and transatlantic system. And he said further that this idea of repudiating the Troika's austerity policies was one of several recent developments which could rapidly bring down the failed Euro system altogether. Another major development was last week we reported that the Swiss had actually decoupled the Swiss franc from the euro. They had been keeping it, even though they're not officially part of the euro, they had been keeping it in line with the euro. So when they decoupled it in anticipation of this, the crash we've been talking about, their Swiss franc went up in a single day over 40%. So just to give you an idea of how tenuous, how unstable the entire situation is. So what's happened, this new Greek government, there are many, many people who are players now, who are actors in this situation, who have been following and studying the ideas of Lynne LaRouche and this movement for years. And at the conclusion of this, I'll actually play for you the address to the Schiller Institute conference that we had a year ago in Europe, which was addressed by Panos Kamenos, who is now one of the major people in the Greek cabinet. He's the defense minister there. But I'll give you a little bit of the background, what we're proposing, the ideas that we have put forward, and the ideas that are being put forward by the current government, and the implications of that in terms of sweeping global changes for the better at this point. So first, a little bit in terms of the economic conditions which Greece and also very, very similarly, Italy, Portugal, Spain, Ireland, Hungary have been facing with the imposition of the troika austerity policies. You really would have to describe it as a process of genocide over the past 5 to 6 years in that country. That after the 2008 crash, you had, of course, the imposition, and the crash was global, so you had an imposition of a series of bailout policies, which, as we know from the United States, it was not a bailout of the American population. It was not a bailout of the Greek population or the Irish population or the Italian population or the Portuguese population. It was a bailout of the banks that were considered too big to fail globally. That's what happened. And you had a concomitant implementation of massive austerity, looting against all of the populations in this system. So you had the crisis of the system, and then you had the government bailout, and then you had the bailout of the bailout, and the bailout of the bailout, and so on, which has continued. And so Greece at the time had a foreign debt of about 110% of their gross domestic product, which was considered absolutely unpayable, unsustainable. So they implemented, the Troika implements a series of policies to make sure that this debt is taken care of. The debt is now 180% of the gross domestic product. So it's gone from more than 100% to almost 200%. You have salaries which have been cut between 25 and 40%, and this is across the board, particularly, and this is people who maintain their jobs. There were, of course, massive cuts in civil service employees, teachers, Senate, healthcare workers, and so forth and so on. Exactly the same thing across the board with pensions. So you have a circumstance where over half of the population is living in abject poverty. This is below the minimum poverty line that they set as a standard in the United States. Half the population is officially below that level. You have 30%, about a third of the population living off of the pensions of the grandparents. So the generations under those who are 65 and above have literally nothing. 2 generations with nothing, no job, no future. The health system has been destroyed. It's been cut by over 50%. People can't get cancer drugs, they can't get other treatments. If you have a serious disease, it's a death sentence. That's the end to it. And this is, of course, where the United States is going, and where in many, many sections of the population it already is. But this, as our friend from Greece described it, is even worse. Was worse than Obamacare at this point. Dean Andromedis, whose article you all have on the Greek proposal to convene a European debt conference, has described that he has traveled to Greece every year for the last 3 years. And he said 3 years ago, when the austerity was really beginning to hit very, very hard, he noticed for the first time a much higher than normal situation of people panhandling, begging on the streets. Then when he went back a year later, he was suddenly seeing panhandlers perhaps every 500 meters or so. So this would be the equivalent like of 1 on every block or every other corner or something like that. He said when he went back last year, you literally had panhandlers every 20 meters or so. So this means you would essentially walk a few feet. You walk from one end of this room to the other room, and you've got entire families in many cases. Pregnant women with children and others that are out in the street just begging for a basic subsistence to exist. 300,000 people have left the country in the past couple of years, and this is out of a country of nearly 10 million people. So we've got a big section of the population, almost 1/5, 1/6 of the population that has been forced out of the country. So it was in that context that you suddenly had, and we've often talked about this, something which is bubbling under the surface, and all of a sudden, and I think this is important to see the potential in terms of a shift that can occur here, suddenly you have the conditions with the right ideas where this suddenly explodes, and where you have a true revolutionary situation which is activated. So the Syriza Party, which was generally getting 3%, maybe 4% of the vote, they got 3% of the vote back in 2009, and they had something like 6 seats in the parliament. By 2012, under these conditions, they suddenly got 26% of the vote and 60 seats. And now, in this election that we're talking about this past Sunday, everything so suddenly exploded, where they got 37% of the vote, 149 seats in the parliament, and then that together with the independent Greek party, which didn't even exist. This was a party that was formed in 2012 by Panos Kamenas, and it was essentially did a lot of things through social networking and so on with this kind of climate that existed. And you suddenly have these people in the government. People were demanding an alternative. There was a recognition in the population that they wanted a government that would say no to the Troika, no to the European Union, no to conditions that were killing them, killing their parents, killing their grandparents, killing the entire nation. Now, this happens in a certain kind of international context, which we've already discussed, which is that also the BRICS now exists, not as a potential, but as a reality. And there are a series of trade deals and so on, which are ongoing. So at this point, I'd like to put up, can we put up the map? Okay, and I guess, is that, oh, good, okay. Yeah, where's it? Oh, okay, well, this is the Eurasian land bridge. And this is the entire kind of international scope of the land bridge. So you have a series of rail lines, and these are not simply rail lines, but these are development corridors that exist. So in other words, you're talking about high-speed rail, which are linking existing cities and new developing cities, but that this would be coupled with a series of, for example, energy pipelines. This would be accompanied by nuclear facilities. These would be fiber optic cables. These would be other kinds of development corridors all along these lines. Green is the existing routes, okay? And this has been updated, so if you look at our proposal from a few years ago, you see there's a lot of things right now here in China, much of which have been just built recently, and then you have planned and proposed routes, and then you have the Silk Road economic belt as part of this. Let's just take a look at the other one again, I think the next one. Okay, yeah. Okay. So, this is Europe, here's Greece, and this is Athens, and just get a sense of the geography here. So, you're talking about going over here, this is Egypt, Libya, Algeria, etc. And this is going, of course, into the east, Russia, beyond China, and so on. There's a very large port called Port Piraeus, which is the port of Athens, right here. And Piraeus, for the last 3 years, this was, China has leased a container terminal, and they have turned that port into a major point of entry for the entirety of Eastern Europe, the Mediterranean, North Africa, and so on. And just to give you an idea of the order of magnitude on this, they have now put through, they went from a few 100,000 containers every year to between 3 and 4 million. This has already been done by the Chinese. And the target is to get immediately up to 6 million containers that would go through this. Our friend Panos Kamenos is the person who, when he was the head of the Merchant Marine Commission, actually negotiated this in 2008, 2009. Now, what the Chinese also want to do is to rebuild all of the rail connections that would go in turn from the port and would go up through this entire area. So they would go up into Vienna, Budapest, Romania, they would go to Northern Europe, Western Europe, and also into Eastern Europe. And if you see again the geography here, this is going directly through former Yugoslavia, basically Serbia, Bulgaria, these entire areas. So, it's where this little triangle is, right there, Athens. So the railroads in the Balkans in particular, as a result of the war that went on there, 2003, 4, etc., are in catastrophic conditions. So the idea would be to rebuild this, and what you're doing is you're taking this entire area, coming from here, and revitalizing all of it. So it's not just something for Greece, but this would take an entire area which has really been devastated. And you think about the economic conditions, Romania, Bulgaria, etc., all of this becomes transformed with that kind of policy. Now, we published a special report a couple of years ago, and there's a significant part of it which is excerpted in this report. And again, for anyone who has not yet purchased The New Silk Road Becomes the World Land Bridge, I really want to encourage you to figure out how to get this. This is really crucial in terms of outlining the whole series of projects that have to be built. But there's a chapter in this book on the whole question of the development of the Mediterranean area, which is taken from a longer paper. And this is something, again, which we are circulating and having studied, and in some cases has been studied by the members of the new Greek government and others. So you have this idea is this is a means for rebuilding and reconstructing all of Europe. There is another proposal which has been a long-term proposal, which is to build a canal which would essentially go from the Mediterranean, again from this port, and it would go straight up through a series of river systems and then other canal systems, and it would hook into the Danube in Germany and then continue. So you could basically go from the Mediterranean to Rotterdam. Actually, is the blue one the proposed canal? I don't know. Anyway, you could go by ship.
There's a canal right there.
Yeah, oh, okay. You could go by ship, basically, from here, straight up, and into Rotterdam, and into the whole North Sea. So that's something that, again, has never existed. And this has been discussed for years. I don't know how many years. It may be like the Bering Straits tunnel that would connect North America to Eurasia, which is a proposal which has been around since the time of Abraham Lincoln, and the Transcontinental Railroad, and it's never been put into to practice. And everyone has said, oh no, it's too expensive, it's too this, it's too that. But what you do with any of these infrastructure projects, because you're talking about massive internal development, is you're actually generating, and this gets back to what we were talking about before in terms of the nature of real wealth. It doesn't come from the land. It doesn't come from somebody that has money. It comes from the ideas of the creative powers of the human mind, and as those powers are actually activated through scientific and technological development, and then these kinds of massive projects, which allow you to uplift everybody. And this is precisely what the Chinese in particular have been putting into practice over the last 2 decades. 800 million people have been lifted out of the condition of abject poverty into the middle class in China. That's more than twice of the population of the United States have been lifted out of poverty. So you think about what I was just describing in terms of what has happened in Greece, what's happened in Italy, what's happened in Ireland, what's happened in these other nations, what's happened in our own nation, where people may think, well, gee, I have more money, but what can you actually buy? And what is the money? It's debt. It's credit card and related debt. Who has savings? They say, oh, well, I have an investment. But the investment is tied in with a bubble, which is completely worthless. So you have nothing. So this has the potential for transforming all of that. This canal, the Chinese and the Serbians just did a massive feasibility study on, and we can expect, if all continues in this direction, that you'll see this put into practice. Now, there's also extensive relationship with Greece, with Russia, and of course you have Greece, Bulgaria, Romania, Russia. These are all Christian Orthodox nations. So you've got a connection there that goes back for thousands of years. Kamenos and his party recently had made a direct connection between Putin. They're like sister parties right now, and in fact he was just recently in Russia, because in the event that Greece is cut off from the EU, then what do they have as a way of backing them up in terms of economic, trade, and development? Well, this is what they've been negotiating with Russia and the BRICS countries more generally. The other very interesting connection with the port of Piraeus is Egypt. And there was a very significant Egyptian delegation in Athens, and the Egyptians have been covering extensively the recent election in Greece. Now, if you look at here, this of course is the Suez Canal, and what you've had over the last 6 months is under the government, the government of El-Sisi in Egypt, they have been working on doubling the size of the Suez Canal. Once again, this is a very old project, and we're coming up actually on the anniversary in April of this month will be the 40th anniversary of LaRouche publishing something called an international proposal for an international development bank. And it just was a little green pamphlet which myself and a few others of us as very young organizers would take out to the unemployment centers in 1975, and we were organizing precisely for these proposals. And one of the proposals prominently featured in that IDB, International Development Bank proposal, is this proposal to double the size of the Suez Canal. So if you look at the relationship between that and the ships that would be going through there, which would be a lot of stuff from China, etc., you have a direct relationship between here and then the port of Piraeus port, and then up, out, throughout all of Western Europe, or in the other direction, down throughout all of the African continent. You have accompanying this, of course, we won't take up too much today, but people can again get it in the new land bridge report. There's a series of major projects now in Egypt, also being led and assisted by the Chinese, of taking this entire area and essentially reclaiming much of the area which is desert now for actual productive agricultural land. You have a series of city building projects, you have a series of rail projects that are ongoing that can begin to realize what is another long-awaited project of a north-south and east-west railroad in Africa. So you have all the beginnings of all of these massive projects now as a result of the BRICS program. So if you look again at this entire map, you can see that Greece, if you look from the vantage point of the transatlantic system, Greece is at the end of Europe. If you look where the dynamic is going on, and maybe just go back to the other big map for a minute. So if you look, okay, yeah. So if you look from the vantage point of here, it's at the end of Europe, but if you look at all these projects, a lot of things are not really filled in here. It's at the beginning of Europe, because this is where the dynamic process is going on. And if you look in both directions, it's obviously at the center of both processes. And this is something that the Greeks are very well aware of, and that they're beautifully positioned, and they intend to exploit it. Now, our role in this, and I mean the role of this political movement, is absolutely crucial in all of this. You do have a situation where both the Syriza party and the independent Greek parties have called explicitly for Glass-Steagall. This is part of their program of both parties. The current finance minister has called not only for Glass-Steagall, but has called for a European debt conference, not just for the Greek debt, but for all of the countries that have undergone a bailout. Ireland, Portugal, Spain, Italy, Hungary. And the idea of this is modeled, and this is the paper that I would urge everyone to study. It's modeled on the 1952 debt conference, 1953 conference in London, which settled all of the German foreign debt. Germany owed a massive amount of debt between the wars. I mean, after World War I, for example, with the Versailles Treaty, they were saddled with billions and billions of dollars of reparations and so on. This played a critical part, actually, in leading into the conditions for World War II. So it was debt which they could not pay. There was no prospect of ever paying it, but it was still on the books. And with it sitting there, they could never rebuild their economy. So there were people who recognized that the German economy was key. This was the motor to rebuilding the entire economy of Europe after World War II. This was the idea behind the Marshall Plan, which grew out of all of this. And what occurred was that there was a renegotiation of the German debt. It was cut by 50%, and the time for people paying it was stretched out. So you had lower payments stretched out over a longer period of time. But they also had a very specific provision, which is that payments could only come out of the surplus of the export earnings. So if there were no surplus from the export earning, well, then the debt simply would not be paid. So this was tremendously successful. And this is what's known as the German economic miracle. Germany recovered and all of Europe recovered. And this is the idea behind what has been proposed now by the current Greek economic minister. Now, this is not fully spelled out. It's not all hashed out. And in fact, we are heavily involved in shaping the discussion, which is why we're writing these articles and having this type of discussion with people there and with people here. I mean, this is what we're going to be discussing and what we're all privileged to participate in and organize in over the next 2 weeks, going into this this conference that we're holding here. One of the first things that we're intervening around is we're saying a debt conference cannot work without first having the imposition of a global Glass-Steagall. The problem that you have is if you've got this massive amount of phony debt which is on the books, and because essentially banks are holding a gun to people's head and saying, well, we'll collapse everything and everybody will lose everything and the banking system won't function and that'll be the end of it, is you've got to have a way of shutting this thing down. You put up a firewall and you have to have a way of going through the books and saying, well, what's legitimate, which is on the books, and what's not legitimate. And that's what you can do with the imposition of Glass-Steagall. It's the first step on that, and then the others, then there's other things. In 1952-53, very significantly, Glass-Steagall existed. So you didn't have the situation you have now. So you have to have the reimposition of Glass-Steagall immediately in order to get this done. And, we've made strides on that. Of course, Glass-Steagall's been reintroduced into the Congress. I think we're now up to 26 or 27 co-sponsors, and we should continue to add to that. And I think it's important always to emphasize that when we're talking about these things, we're talking about necessary measures to prevent war. You've got to have an alternative. You've got to have a pathway. Otherwise, we're headed to collapse or war. You also need a new type of investment bank. We are proposing that you have a European infrastructure investment bank, not simply using the existing institutions that have been set up by the EU, And this infrastructure investment bank would cooperate with the Asia infrastructure investment banks and could be used to finance this massive infrastructure projects in Asia, Africa, the economy that the BRICS are creating, and obviously this would intersect what we were describing in the beginning, which is this American, the Reconstruction Finance Corporation and the National Bank here in the United States. So you could operate as one integrated unit. So therefore, what we do in the U.S. to destroy Wall Street, we have a big, big responsibility. And the Greek development is big. I mean, on the one hand, you could see a chain reaction effect. In Spain, there is a sister party to the Syriza party, which is expected to win elections, local elections, overwhelmingly in May of this year. And then in October, you have scheduled general elections. But in Europe, they have parliamentary systems, so you could have election tomorrow. You could have election at any time that overturns all of this. In Italy, you've got a huge movement for Glass-Steagall. Our people, our co-thinkers, like Kamenos in Italy, have put in Glass-Steagall resolutions essentially every year, every parliamentary session for the past 4 or 5 years. In Ireland, you have the Sinn Féin, which is now the largest party officially in Ireland. They don't have the largest number of parliamentary seats, but they're the largest party, and we have co-thinkers there. The president of Ireland has sent greetings on 2 or 3 occasions to Schiller Institute conferences here and in Europe, and they have openly, the Sinn Féin has come out supporting this idea of a debt conference. In Portugal, you have the Socialist Party, which has a similar anti-austerity, anti-troika policy, which is slated to win elections, gain major seats. So you can see, I think, a situation where internationally you have a new configuration. All of these things, many of them are as a result of the products of the ideas and conceptions around which this movement has been promulgating for years, and organizing, because that's how you have to do it. You can't give up and say, gee, well, we didn't win in this particular occasion, or this intervened, or something else happened. So we have just been tirelessly on this campaign since, in Mr. LaRouche's case, even earlier, but particularly I would date this back to this April 1975 publishing of the International Development Bank and the corresponding publications and conferences that we've held. So all of this comes together around Manhattan and around the Manhattan Project, around New York City, both for historical reasons. This is the port of entry for everybody in the world coming into the New World. People came through New York, the Statue of Liberty, give me your tired, give me your poor, and so on. So wherever else people might have gone to, most Americans, future Americans, came through the port of New York. It's also the intellectual center because of what we've discussed with Alexander Hamilton. And what exists today in New York is every single country that I've mentioned, be it Bulgaria or Serbia or China or Russia. You can find not just a handful of people, but in most cases, you have the largest number of so-called hyphenated Americans in the world outside of the native country living right here in New York City than any other place in the world. So that gives us a tremendous organizing potential if we use it, if we activate it. And we have among, you know, the second, third, fourth generation Americans, we have, of course, the historic founding principles of our republic. So these two things put together make New York and make the Manhattan Project and make what we're asking everybody here to assist us in doing. I mean, we're in like a rich situation. It's like, you know, we're walking on the beach and there's a diamond, you know, every couple of inches. That's if you're looking for it, if you know what you're looking for. So that's the situation that we're organizing in. So I want to just conclude by playing for you two clips. The first one is really pretty funny because this Greek government, and of course nobody knows quite what they're going to do right now, and there's been all of this tension and nervousness and so on. So the head of the Eurogroup, who was also the Dutch finance minister, Jurgen Dijsselbloem, flew over to Athens, essentially, you know, with their delegation to lay down the law to the new government, what the orders of the Troika was going to be. And Dijsselbloem, along with the supposedly tough negotiator Thomas Weiser, who heads up the Eurogroup working group, must have read, this is our report, the Riot Act to their European partner, the Greeks, after which Tsipras and Varoufakis basically showed them the door. So the entire meeting, right, they're flying in and laying down the law, and they were like out of the door in 30 minutes. And then so they followed the meeting with a press conference. And I'm going to play you the press conference, which is about 45 seconds, so watch. And it begins with Dijsselbloem reiterating the EU line that Greece has got to stick to its agreements. They've got to reject any idea of a debt conference. And they said such a venue already exists. It's called the Eurogroup, as you know. And Varoufakis basically stuck it to Dijsselbloem, saying that the European Commission, the European Central Bank, and the International Monetary Fund can stay home. That Greece is going to not talk to them, but will speak only directly to the legitimate institutions of the European Union and the IMF. And so he basically says we're not going to talk to the Troika. This platform, what he described, enable us to win the confidence of the Greek people. Our first action as a government will not be to reject the rationale of questioning the program through a request to extend the program. So forget it. So what you're going to see is the last 45 minutes of the press conference, and you'll see Varoufakis' statements, and I think you'll notice the expression on Dijsselbloem's face. Oh yeah, that's it. It's in Greek, but I think you get the message.
θέλετε,
That's Varoufakis.
και σύμφωνα με το Ευρωπαϊκό Κοινοβούλιο, σαφρά δομημένη επιτροπή, δεν έχουμε στόχο να συνεργαστούμε. Ευχαριστώ πολύ.
He's waiting for the translation. He's shaking his head.
In the conversation.
He's gonna whisper
Ξαφώς
something
είναι
in
και
his ear.
ολοκληρώθηκαν οι κοινές δηλώσεις, η κοινή συνέντευξη τύπου του Υπουργού Οικονομικών με τον επικεφαλής του Eurogroup και τον κύριο Βαρουφάκη να απορρίπτει και να αποκλείει το ενδεχόμενο κατηγορηματικά, όπως είπε, να μπει σε συζητήσεις με την.
So according to the reports, when he leans over and says something to him, and he just, he's listening and then he's just shaking his head, and then he says to him as he's walking out, "You just killed the Troika." And if you notice, Dieselblum has, the suit, etc. And Varoufakis is there like with his shirt open and, his shirt, his shirt tail hanging out of his pants and very, very relaxed. So this is a gigantic, F you to the Troika. We are not going to take this genocide anymore. Now what we're going to go to is just a little over a year ago, we had a major conference. This is even before the BRICS was implemented, but it was on the question of the Silk Road becoming the new land bridge, and the featured speaker, who at that point was the head of a little party in Greece, was Panos Kaminos, and I'm going to play just the beginning of his.
Is this from?
You have it?
It's a great pleasure for me to be with you today, and I thank the organizers very warmly for the invitation. The subject of my speech is Greece in the framework of the new Silk Road. As you all know, over the past 5 years, what became manifest is what was being prepared since the 1970s, the domination of financial capitalism over countries' economies, and in particular of their national policies. The economic crisis of 2008 transformed itself into a humanitarian crisis, which especially hit the economies of most European Union countries and the United States. Among them, my country, Greece, which was already in a vulnerable economic situation, very hard hit. Greece became a member of the European Union on January 1st, 1981. The creation of that union, and I insist on the past tense of the verb to be, was one of the greatest political and economic achievements of post-war Europe, because it emphasized the social state. The Second World War had devastating effects on the populations of Europe. He recalls that his country became a member of the European Union in 1981, that was a very great achievement, but it's no longer the case today. Whereas the initial project should have reached a high point with the creation of the common currency, the euro, it was supposed to be a factor to help the integration process in the European Union. But the worldwide credit crisis of 2008 revealed the fact that the Eurozone had no line of defense, nothing, and was not ready politically, economically, monetarily to manage the crisis and the ensuing recession. The credit crisis became the debt crisis of the Eurozone. In other words, the Eurozone failed because the treaty not only did not provide for, but in fact prohibited a member state from being rescued by its partners. I am not the only one who has admitted that. The IMF itself stated in December 2013 that the Eurozone was in worse shape than in 2008, while the United States, where the crisis began, had been able to overcome the crisis and to begin an economic recovery. The figures, dear friends, speak for themselves. The unemployment rate in the Eurozone is over 12%, with the highest rates in Greece, 27%, Spain, Portugal, and Cyprus. More than half of the unemployed are under 25 years old. That's about 10% of the youth in Greece who have no job. And most of them are long-term unemployed. In other words, our economy does not create any extra jobs, and which it cannot, a fortiori, integrate the young people with their skills and knowledge. More than 300,000 Greeks have left Greece over the past 2 years for Europe and for the United States. These are young people with qualifications, with skills. The vision European citizens had of a union of citizens collapsed brutally in 2008. It's sad to say so, but it's nonetheless so. The European Union today is nothing but an autocracy which aims to sell off the economies of other member states to the banking system and to dismantle national sovereignty. In the EU today, the bankers take political and economic decisions for the governments and the peoples. We have lost the power of the citizens over power. Democracy is dead. Moreover, the unilateral management of the crisis in Europe by Germany and its hegemonic role threatens to lead to catastrophe. Those are not my words, dear friends, but those of one of the greatest political thinkers, the German Jürgen Habermas, which he said in a recent speech at the Université of Louvain in Belgium, while calling for more solidarity and more Europe. The independent Greeks support the following positions. First, respect for the sovereignty of member states of the EU, instituting a European Union of equality, autonomy, and solidarity, with full legal status of the institutions and activities of the national member states. Second, immediate abolition of the loan protocols and agreements, contracts. Most of these contracts have never been signed. They are agreements which have not been submitted to the parliaments of to the national parliaments of the member states. Third, the repositioning of the European Parliament in the decision-making process. 4, drawing up a European development project based on social justice. A systematic fight against corruption, systematic fight against tax havens. At this point, I would say that Germany does not give Greece, in spite of a lawsuit, they will not compensate them for the people who were hired illegally by Siemens. Number 7, definitive treatment of the debt crisis in the Eurozone under a European agreement similar to that of the London Conference in 1953, which settled the German debt after the war. 8, the immediate adoption and issuance of the Eurobond by the European Central Bank. The immediate establishment of a European rating agency to assess the solvency of the member states. A tax on financial transactions. The separation of commercial banking from investment activities. 12, the systematic fight against unemployment, and in particular for young people. The restoration of the welfare state, the fight against neo-Nazism, and number 15, repositioning the problem of immigration by immediately changing the terms of the Dublin II Treaty. On Greece, at this time, we have an immigration of 2.5 million foreigners who have no job, who have no future. They're blocked in Greece and they cannot leave. However, Greece does represent the kernel of stability, energy security, and peace in the greater region of southern Europe. And it could become a bridge of communication and understanding between East and West. Our membership in NATO and the EU does not prevent us from maintaining close political, economic, and cultural relations with other countries, especially those with which we have historical relations, such as Russia and China. We should develop those relations in the framework of the more general strategic interests of West and East. The question which arises is the following. Is it possible that the maritime and land Silk Roads contribute to the economic recovery of the European continent and of Southeast Europe and North Africa? Ancient Greece played a historical role in the economic, cultural, and political development of the then-known world. It was the center of the world trade routes at the time and of economic development, from the Balkan Peninsula to the Baltic Sea in the north, to Russia and the Indian subcontinent to the east, and the Mediterranean countries and the African continent to the south. Today, we are witnessing the resurrection of the Silk Road, both on land and on sea. Implementation of this majestic plan presents Greece with the opportunity to take up its historical role in the region and to consolidate almost permanently its geopolitical position as a pillar of economic development toward the above-mentioned regions. The development of these new trade routes will lead to a boom of different means of transportation because of the increased amount of goods that will have to be transported. That means the almost certain development of Greek infrastructures, railways, roads, ports. The future of Greece could be better if a strategic orientation were taken to establish links with some of the most dynamic economies of the world and to find new sources of economic support. One of these countries, besides Russia, is China. Those who know China and its needs know that Greece plays a preponderant role in the region, not only for historical and cultural reasons, but also economically, because Greece is the most economical conduit for Chinese exports on their way to the rest of Europe, to the Arab Peninsula and North Africa. Dear friends, at this point, I would like to inform you that China is already in Greece.
Lors de mon mandat en tant que secrétaire d'État
When I was state secretary,
de la marine marchande,
Deputy State Secretary for the Merchant Marines, I signed in November 2008 an agreement between the Piraeus Port Authority and the Chinese COSCO Group for a 30-year concession of part of the container station in the port of Piraeus. This port has become a link for east-west trade and allowed Greece to consolidate its presence as an economic center of Southeast Europe, and in particular of the Mediterranean, during a particularly precarious period for Middle Eastern and North African countries. Furthermore, the port is taking on a strategic role in cargo transport from China to Europe and vice versa. A few months ago, in July 2004, a new agreement was signed with the COSCO Group, which will invest 230 billion euros in the port. With that investment, the port of Piraeus will become the largest in the Mediterranean, and it will be able to increase its capacities from 3.7 million containers to 6.2 million per year. Meanwhile, a recent study shows that the turnover of companies headquartered in Piraeus will reach 1.5 billion euros per year, while the guaranteed income of the port is 3.4 billion euros. Finally, 800 jobs will be created thanks to that investment. In that perspective, linking the port with the railway infrastructure, as it was done last year, ensures that goods arriving in Piraeus will be routed quickly to the markets of Central Europe. Similarly, goods from factories in Europe can go faster and at lower cost to all other destinations worldwide. I would just add to that China's commercial interest focuses on the expansion plans of COSCO for the port of Piraeus and the development of the rail network. However, that does not exclude the possibility of future investments in similar infrastructure elsewhere in Greece. For example, at Patras. Piraeus was thus established as a gateway for East-West trade, and its role as economic center of the Mediterranean and Southeast Europe has been strengthened. But Greece is not only Piraeus. There are other ports in Greece that can benefit from the Silk Road.
You can stop it there. Okay. There's a few minutes more, and this is available on the Schiller Institute website, so I would urge you, the conference that this was actually in just 3 months ago, this was in October of 2014, and so this is, he said at one point, well, the people don't have the power to do this, and that was 3 months ago, and today they do. So you saw the earlier clip with the power that they showed to the troika. I want to conclude, and then we can take a few questions and talk a little bit about the implementation over the next week. But one further thing just to emphasize in terms of Mr. LaRouche's stress in the last 24 hours. This is from the webcast last night, and Mr. LaRouche was asked an institutional question, which actually came from a representative from Russia directly, on his reading on the extent to which there is a serious opposition in the United States to Obama's war policy, if there was serious opposition coming from within the United States establishment at this time. And this question was posed in the context of the insane, provocative statements that Obama made during his recent State of the Union address escalating the war drive against Russia. And everyone knows, I mean, he's been pretty clear that this is aimed at regime change in Russia. Many, many people have pointed to the fact that that this is far more dangerous than the 1962 Cuban Missile Crisis. Because in 1962, you had a relationship between Kennedy and Nikita Khrushchev. And even at the height of the tensions, there was an actual dialogue and discussion, which was very closely protected through a series of secret channels. So in the US at that time, where you had some real utopian crazies in the US military who were just saying, you know, bomb them, have war, etc., Kennedy realized, and Khrushchev together with him, that both of them were at the precipice of annihilation, of the potential annihilation of the entire human race. And so they had, as leaders of major superpowers with that kind of capability, that they had to be in a rational dialogue. You have nothing of that sort with Obama. There is no relationship with Putin. There is no rationality there. There's no concern there. So it's in this context that Lynne was being asked specifically about some of the things that have surfaced. Among them, a recent article published by Leslie Gelb, in which he calls for purging the entire Obama inner circle, most particularly Obama's very narrow national security team. And Gelb is a very highly respected. He served as president of the Council on Foreign Relations from 1993 to 2003. He's now the president emeritus of the CFR, and so on. So what he says has to be taken fairly seriously, and he writes an article which was entitled, "This is Obama's Last Foreign Policy Chance," in which he begins by just saying the president's team can't be trusted to conduct U.S. national security policy. It must be replaced at once. And then he goes through naming the names of who has to be replaced, and concludes not just stopping short of saying Obama himself has to be removed, but he says that that Obama is the key problem and he's also the solution. So Lyndon was asked about this, and his answer, Jeff Steinberg, who conveyed this for him, said Mr. LaRouche's view is very simple. It's Obama who's the problem. And it's Obama who's got to go, and the consequences of not doing that are that you run the continuing risk with greater and greater probability of general war against Russia, which very quickly can become thermonuclear war of extinction. And he goes on that it's not just Leslie Gelb, but this has been echoed by many, many other voices, among them two former senators, Sam Nunn and Richard Lugar, who were the authors of the bill which provided funding for decades for to assist Russia in dismantling elements of their nuclear weapons programs. You have Theodore Polster, who's one of the leading nuclear weapons experts, who said that we have never been closer to the danger of triggering an accidental war, because the entire response time has now been, for a counterstrike, has now been reduced down to 3 minutes. So in other words, the actual decision making, you don't have time for any consultation or anything. It's made by one person instantaneously. On the Russian side, you have very similar warnings. Igor Ivanov, who's the former foreign minister of Russia, made a statement, and even somebody who's normally not been in any camp that we would, support, the former president Mikhail Gorbachev, who for decades has assisted and been associated with the European oligarchy, made a very, very similar statement. So you have a network of Russian, American, European leading voices that are highly respected establishment figures that are saying, quote, we are on the edge of thermonuclear extinction. And in fact, what you had since the last November elections, and just to recall, the November elections were a complete repudiation by the Democratic Party or by Democratic voters of Obama and his agenda. And people voiced their opposition to this to the policy by not coming out and voting. So you had a huge sweep, one of the biggest in history in terms of a defeat of an existing president and an existing party in that election, but that was not support for the Republicans. This was a repudiation of that policy. So at that time, a number of different groups within the Democratic Party began agitating for a purge of the White House. And there were many meetings, quiet meetings with elder statesmen from the Democratic Party with Barack Obama during the Christmas to New Year's recess. And Obama was presented with exactly the demand that's contained in Leslie Gell's article of the week, namely a total house cleaning of the White House. In effect, Obama was told that his presidency had to be put into receivership. Now, while Obama never said a flat-out no, he never responded at all. And now we've reached the point that those demands are still on the table, but they've been superseded by recognition, which Mr. LaRouche recognized since the spring of 2009, that the problem is Obama. And now we're at the point where the very threat of thermonuclear extinction is on the table as never before. And when you have a situation this fragile, where you have the Ukraine situation as the thumb in the eye of Russia, as a continuing provocation under the circumstances, then one of the most important things that you fall back on is some type of sane relations, human relations between two heads of state. But in the case of Obama, there's no relations at all. He's been characterized as an extraordinarily amateurish, childish, and immature, and we're at the point where the consequences of tolerating that could very well be the extinction of mankind on this planet. So Jeff concludes, we're in a pretty difficult moment right now where nothing short of the removal of Obama and the immediate implementation of the policies of the transatlantic region of wiping out Wall Street and London's gambling bubble and going back to the Hamiltonian set of alternative policies immediately. Nothing short of that is going to actually cut it. And we will remain on a hair trigger for a complete economic and financial meltdown, disintegration, or alternatively, the imminent danger of thermonuclear war if these measures are not taken now. So I just wanted to stress that in terms of how significant and urgent our deployment is over the next days. And it's in that context that I want to invite everyone to attend the rally at Federal Hall. We have a permit from the National Parks Department, so we can be on the steps of Federal Hall, the beautiful building with the Washington statue at the top of it. And we also have a permit from the police department for a sound system, which means we'll have our chorus, we'll have patriotic songs, we'll have funny songs with funny jingles about bringing down Wall Street. But mainly what we're going to have is we want to have a lot of people out there engaging people in an actual discussion of the fact that everybody knows, including them, including the people who work there, or who used to work there. 50,000 people were just laid off. So maybe we'll see a lot of people with their boxes, cleaning out their desks, for the end of the month. So we want to be there, and we want to recruit people to a sane policy. And maybe a lot of people, given what's going on with Greece, with the Swiss, with the Euro, etc., will be predisposed to listen to what we have to say. We certainly found that when we were there a couple of weeks ago. So we want to keep that pressure up. So that will be 11 o'clock to 1 o'clock next week. And then following that, for anyone who is mid-30s or younger, 20s, early 30s, we will have a cadre school in the evening or late afternoon on Tuesday, and anyone interested in that should speak to, or I would say anyone in that category, age category, should speak to Stephanie. Raise your hand, Stephanie. Stephanie's there in the back about attending the cadre school, and that's open to everyone. I mean, everyone in that group, so you can recruit additional people. On Thursday, we have the New York Community Chorus, which is at 7:30 in the evening, and we have a nationwide conference call, which is at 9 o'clock in the evening. And this is a briefing for LaRouche PAC activists all over the country. This past week, we had 70 New Yorkers on a call that had maybe 300 people on it, and we'd like to get out to having over 100 people from the New York metropolitan area on a regular basis. So people are also welcome to get onto that, and I'll look up the number and give it to you before the end of the evening. Stephanie, you want to say anything about the chorus?
Everyone should go.
What are we doing? Where is it?
Oh, didn't Diane just find a new location?
But it's the same location this week. Isn't it?
No, January 29th, last Thursday was the last time at the old that place on Broadway. Yeah, I think it's a different location.
TBA?
Sorry.
Okay.
I'll call Diane and ask.
Okay. Okay.
I know last week we worked on learning the Star Spangled Banner, so the national anthem, but all 4 voices, because most everyone knows the melody line, the soprano line, but there's actually a tenor, alto, bass.
There's also 3 verses, right?
And,
Which,
well, there's technically 4 verses, but one of them's kind of weird. So yeah, so we learned all 3, verses and all parts, and it really takes people by surprise because everyone
Yes.
kind of knows the national anthem, but then you hear it, polyphonically with other voices, and then it's very moving. So we worked on that, and we're working on different parts of Handel's Messiah. Because the idea for the New York Community Chorus came out of the fact that, okay. So in reaction to,
I'll text
the situation with Garner and Staten Island, and the oligarchy's whole strategy of divide and conquer, right? Divide, conquer, keep everyone separated, and then we're all fighting each other rather than fighting Wall Street and the British Empire. So as a reaction to that, we sponsored a Messiah sing-along in December. And so out of that process, we had the idea that we should have a chorus in New York City, because most of us are in Jersey, and we need something in New York. So, but Handel's Messiah is, part of it is Christmas and the other part is Easter. So I think we're looking to have another, so here's the goal, here's the kind of near-term goal, is that by Easter we can have another sing-along, so the chorus is going to learn the choruses from Handel's Messiah. And you don't have to be a super religious person, that's not the point, You know, it is an affirmation of what it is to be human, just like what the Greeks just did in their election, that we're not going to be beasts, and we're not going to let an oligarchy cull the herd as if we were beasts, and you demand what the sanctity of human life is about. And the best way to do that is just like the civil rights movement, you know? When you're up against something really ugly, you yourself don't have to become ugly to fight it. If you become beautiful, then the ugliness of the beast that you're fighting, you know, it'll destroy itself. So, in a situation where things are really ugly, we have to become beautiful, and that's how you're gonna really inspire the kind of the courage and the passion, you know, to really fight. Because otherwise, I mean, this is a good turnout for a typical Saturday meeting, but honestly, 25 people are gonna, you know, change the world. Yeah, if you have ideas that are much bigger than any individual, then yes. So we don't have guns and we don't have money, right? How are we gonna take over the world? Well, you do it with ideas, and you can tell that that's working because Lynne LaRouche has never had a lot of money. He's never had guns. Well, some of the members had guns, but that's a whole different story. That's never been the policy of the movement, and yet we're taking over the world. Like, people that we collaborate with just got elected, you know, in the government of Greece. The BRICS, I mean, this is all LaRouche's idea. So we are actually, we're literally taking over the world. We just gotta take over the United States now. That's our job. So here in New York City, yes. So, to inspire the kind of courage and passion that you need to wage what could be a really scary fight, you know, against Wall Street, where we're expecting congressmen to do and all this kind of stuff. So beauty is the way to do that, and that's the whole idea of the community chorus. And just so this an Easter sing along, I think, right? That's the plan.
April 4th.
Okay, April 4th. Add that to your calendar. Everything else we're doing, we're gonna keep you guys so busy. So so that's the idea. Over the next several weeks, every Thursday, we're working on different choruses from Handel's Messiah, so that we can have another, you know, big open to the city, open to the community sing along.
All right.